This Soonerscoop.com video is streaming in crystal clear 4K resolution on YouTube thanks to Enjoy Vision in Oklahoma City. Don't miss a moment on or off the field. Make every day a highlight with LASIK at Enjoy Vision. Enjoy Vision. This is where Sooner Scoop LASIK.
Hello and welcome back. Eddie Radosovich, George Stoya here from the Soonerscoop.com studios. It is a Monday, March 3rd, and busy week ahead. Spring football beginning for Oklahoma coming up on Thursday. They will be out onto the field. We'll get into all the particulars too because Wednesday is going to be a media extravaganza. George, how are we?
Excited. I think that the months after football season ends always kind of slow.
Sure.
Basketball obviously is something you pay attention to, but spring football is always kind of exciting. It's kind of when we first start catching wind of some of the newcomers, guys that are standing out, and then hey, we get to talk to Jim Nagy on Wednesday, so can't complain.
We will get into the particulars of everything that comes with a media extravaganza. It's going to be a bonanza to a certain extent come Wednesday, talking to Brent Venables as well. But do want to get your thoughts on the NFL Combine from over the weekend. Obviously, it was a great weekend for all three suitors up there. But first, exciting news to share with you here as it's that time of the year. And our good friends over at Big Game Football Factory have done it. They've done it again. There it is, the 2025 official OU Jordan Fly Elite Football. It just dropped, and you can buy one. You can get your own. It, of course, just like the one from last year, this will be the football that Oklahoma uses this season. If you're interested in doing so, every ball has comes with this certificate of authenticity. Nailed it this time around, as well as being handcrafted in the U.S. by Big Game Football Factory. All you got to do is to get yours. You can be one of the first people to own it. The same ball that John Mateer will be hoisting and throwing upon wide receivers who we don't know yet that we will talk about here in a second. All you got to do is go get yours at biggameusa.com/Sooners. biggameusa.com/Sooners, as you see there on the screen. And it's kind of unique this year with the red laces, which is something that I didn't even know that you could do in terms of changing the color of the laces.
I didn't know you could either, but it's kind of sick.
Yeah.
It looks pretty cool. And then the Jordan logo's huge and the OU logo's huge. I know last year they just had kind of the smaller OU logo.
Right.
This year it looks pretty cool with the big OU logo.
You can see the difference between the two from this year to last year. So I kind of like the this year's ball, the 2025 ball with the red Jumpman there on the screen, and then obviously this one from last year, the Vapor Elite,
which they should just burn.
2024,
maybe burn all the footballs from last year's team.
Well, they certainly got into the hands of other defenders, right? Many times, many times. That's going to be a key going into the season. Once again, if you want to get yours, as you see it up there on the screen, biggameusa.com/Sooners. Thank you to the fine people of Big Game Football Factory for being with us yet again as we get into what is 2025, right? And the beginning of 2025 obviously coincides, kind of begins or ends, whichever way you want to look at it, with the NFL Combine. And we talked about it on Friday. Ethan Downs and Danny Stutzman were fantastic.
Yep.
And then Billy Bowman was really good. I think all three did themselves really, really well. Maybe Ethan Downs more so than the other two.
They definitely, none of them hurt themselves.
Sure.
I would say that. I think every single one of them maybe improved their stock or at least stayed where they were at. I think especially, Ethan Downs was a guy, and I mentioned it on the show last week on Around the Corner, that he came into the Combine really needing to prove himself, that he was worthy of the invite, that he was somebody that should be drafted. So I thought he did phenomenal. He runs a 4.7 40, and then he puts up 32 on the bench press, which was the most by any defensive end. So, and teams are going to fall in love with that
and
guy.
Not just this year. That was the most of any defensive end group since, I believe, 2019
I think that is correct.
Which is incredible.
Which is awesome. I think he really did a nice job. His tape, too. Like, he's not going to be somebody in the NFL that's going to be this just elite pass rusher, but you know what you're going to get from him every single down, and NFL teams are going to like that. I thought Danny put on a great performance, runs a great 40 time 4.52, I think was the third best in the linebacker group. And then his tape is obviously phenomenal, and he was really good in all the other drills too. And then Billy Bowman on Friday Did exactly what we thought he was going to do. Went out there, ran a really good time. I think, what was it, 4.43?
4.43, yeah.
On the 40-yard dash, which is really good for a safety. I thought he looked the best in the drills when they had him catching balls and ball hawking things like that. I thought he really showed off his skills, and he's somebody, too, that I think teams are going to really like, Eddie, because you can kind of play him in different spots. You could play him at safety. I think he's probably going to be a nickel. That's where he played a lot at in the Senior Bowl, and I think NFL teams really like that. So I think he could play multiple spots. But, I think Danny and Billy are both going to be day 2 guys. Definitely Danny. We'll see. Billy, I think, is probably a 3rd rounder, maybe early 4th rounder. And then I think Ethan performed well enough to get himself drafted. So we'll see. I mean, I think he could go as high as 5th. I still think he could probably go maybe later, like 6th or 7th, but I do think he's going to get his name called.
Pretty cool for all 3 of those guys to go up to Indianapolis and certainly perform like you thought maybe they would, and maybe even exceed some expectations. I know there were some people, walking out of the combine that definitely didn't help themselves. Speaking of somebody like a Will Howard.
Yeah, Will Howard. Not a
rough
great
day.
Yeah, but also, just so people know, and we'll get into the schedule this week, but March 11th is OU's Pro Day. I don't know who's participating in it. I would suspect Danny, Billy, and Ethan won't participate in Pro Day. But, a DJ Terry, I'm sure, will be out there, and several others. I'm sure.
As you said, that's coming up on March 11th. That is a week from, I believe, for Wednesday.
Tomorrow.
Yeah, a week from Wednesday.
No, tomorrow.
Tuesday.
It's on a
That's
Tuesday.
right. Yeah, 4th is tomorrow.
That would make our days are going to get really mixed up this week.
They will. And I guess in a way, it's all kind of around one day, right?
Yep.
But there is a lot to get into, and that is going to be on Wednesday when we talk to Brent Venables, as well as Jim Nagy, as well as John Mateer. All 3 of those guys are kind of getting their separate press conferences. And then we're going to meet all the freshmen, all the transfers that are coming in. I think the number is 35 combined freshmen and portal guys. So a lot of new faces to get to know here over the next couple days. And that kind of leads into to Wednesday morning. And I think that we're going to talk to John Mateer. I know that there's going to be plenty of questions to be asked of Jim Nagy as well. And not to mention Brent Venables, who's probably coaching, not even probably, he is coaching for his job in 2025. Let's start with Jim Nagy, because I think he's kind of the unknown, just in terms of he's new to the program, less than a week on the job by then, or I guess it would be just about a week on the job. It'll be kind of interesting to get his insight. I know that you've been doing some back channeling and working with, interviewing people that know Jim Nagy well enough. I guess in a way it's going to be interesting just to hear, why the hell did you come to Norman?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the number one question, because it's my understanding that he had opportunities elsewhere. Obviously, you could have stuck with the Senior Bowl, where he's had a lot of success. It's a good job. He's built it into really a monster in terms of being an all-star game for college football players. But there was other GM jobs in college that I think schools would have liked to have him, that he talked to about. I think there was assistant GM jobs or higher up jobs, executive jobs at NFL teams that I think he was interested in. And he ultimately chose Oklahoma. I would love to know why he chose OU. And then I'd also just like to know his vision. I think that we see all the things that he's going to be in charge of. What does that look like? What does his front office look like? What is the structure? And maybe that's a question for Brent too, the structure of, Jim Nagy being the GM, Brent being the head coach, who has final say in what. And I don't know how much clarity they'll give on that in some regard, but it's going to be fascinating to hear why Nagy chose OU, what his vision is, and what's the structure going to be under his direction.
Yeah, particularly the structure of everything that is going to be Oklahoma's front office. It seems like there's a lot of unknown. There's a lot of knowns out there after he was hired, and how they want to set it up. But the particulars of, all right, how many guys are we looking at, or women? How many people are we looking at to be a part of this front office?
I think that's an important question. I think it's also, what has been the response from the boosters? We talk all the time on the show. Fans talk about it all the time. OU needs more money. They have to be competitive in NIL. What's Jim Nagy's stance on that? What does he think OU's financial situation is? How does he feel like he can get more people involved, make sure that OU does have the resources to compete at the highest level, as well as go out and get the right staff members to be in that front office and go get the right players. Like I think it's also just going to be, somebody I'm sure will ask him about just his evaluation. What kind of players does OU need to bring in? I'm sure the last week or so now, and even through the interview process, he was evaluating OU's team. What have they looked like under Brent Venables? What are they missing? What players do they need to go get? I think a good question on Wednesday will be, hey, spring portal's a month away.
Right.
What areas does OU really need to improve upon?
I was about to say we're looking at about 45-ish days, give or take, until April 16th and the opening of the transfer portal for the spring, which you would imagine is going to be kind of the first the first test for Jim Nagy in putting together a roster.
Yeah, I think that it's huge. And, having a good first impression with the fan base, right? Going out and getting, I don't know if you can go get a big name. We'll see who enters the spring transfer portal. But going and getting, a veteran cornerback that I think this team desperately needs. Maybe you can go get a tight end that has some production from a year ago. Like, I think going and being aggressive in this spring portal and seeing if you can't add a couple more players, I think is a huge test for Jim Nagy. And we saw it last year. You did that in the spring portal a year ago. They got Dominic Williams. They got a Branson Hickman who maybe didn't turn out to be the player that they had hoped, but somebody they kind of needed, right, when Troy Everett goes down. So I think it's going to be really interesting and just seeing his interaction with the team over these next couple months in spring practice, because he's going to be out there, I think, at every practice, evaluating guys, seeing, hey, is this guy worth that amount of money? Is this a position that we need to add to? All of those things, it's going to be interesting, I think, on Wednesday, see how much time we get with him. He's going to be fielding a lot of questions. I think even questions like, hey, you're going to have to negotiate contracts. Are you comfortable doing stuff like that? Like, that wasn't something that he was doing at the Senior Bowl. All of those things are going to come up on Wednesday, and then the next next few months we'll see how he executes all of it.
One thing that I'm sure will come up is his relationship with Brent Venables, and I know that you're going to write about it here moving forward as we get closer to I guess the actuality of the start of spring ball. But at the same time, I do think that was something that played a role in him taking the position with Oklahoma.
Yeah, it's my understanding he thought very highly of Brent, thinks that he's a very good football coach, understands X's and O's extremely well, and even personnel. And we've heard that under Brent a lot, where he does try and find hidden gems and stuff like that, which you see the Senior Bowl has done over the years. But I think that they're very like-minded in how they want to approach, building a roster. And so I'm interested to hear from Brent's perspective what that collaboration is going to be like, because I think Brent's a guy that is still going to want to have a lot of control, and I'm not saying he won't, but I'm interested to see what's that dynamic like, especially in a make-or-break year for Brent. And I think that that's going to be fascinating to hear Brent and how involved he was, because I think he was kept in the loop on what they were doing at GM, but I don't think it was him pounding the table for Jim Nagy or anything, or even in the interviews with Jim Nagy.
I almost wonder if this is a situation kind of like all of us out in YouTube land or online or wherever, that when you hear that they got Jim Nagy, it was like, oh shit, okay. Like, I wonder if Brent had that same type of reaction.
I'm sure he did, and I bet that's probably the first question is something about Jim Nagy to Brent. So, and there's a lot of, football questions we got to ask Brent, but
sure.
That is certainly going to be the number one storyline on Wednesday.
Well, let's get into a little bit of Brent, because I think that you don't have to be living under a rock to know that 2025 is going to be an integral year for Brent Venables and the tenure at Oklahoma. If that's going to extend past, I guess that'd be year 5, but at the same time, like, what do you want to hear from Brent Venables coming up on Wednesday? Because I do think that the way that the season ended, obviously, this is the last time that we talked to Brent was after the game down in Fort Worth when you get beat by Navy in the last seconds. It's going to be rather interesting to see kind of what his tone is going to be, and not that he's going to step on a bunch of landmines or grenades on Wednesday to get off the spring off of on a bad foot. But I do think like there's some serious, like, hard truths that are going to have to kind of be revealed as they try to dig themselves out of this hole.
Yeah, there's a lot to ask Brent. I mean, heck, we haven't even asked him about Nate Dreiling. Like, that was an underrated thing that happened, just a month ago.
And not to mention, by the way, you're taking over the defensive play calling, which they've been upfront about.
Yeah, and I think that's an important question. Like, why did he end up deciding to do that? Like, this is a year that obviously is super important. And his comments, in that press release saying, hey, we know this is a crucial year to get back on track. like, I think asking him about that and understanding, this spring is pivotal for him, developing some of these guys that are coming back or some of the guys that they've brought in. We haven't even asked him about some of the transfer portal guys,
right?
And their approach and bringing in some of these guys. So it's going to be fascinating. I mean, it's crazy. We haven't talked to him since I think down in Frisco.
Right.
And so just kind of seeing like what he feels like the pulse of the program is right now. And if he feels like there's some positive momentum heading into, a very important spring practice.
I would imagine that one of the reasons that there could be some positivity, and particularly on the offensive side of the ball, I think the defensive side of the ball, somewhat known with the guys that are coming back. Obviously, they're going to be pretty damn good on paper. But for this whole entire thing to work, and it's going to be something that you hear from now until the beginning of August and on into September, John Mateer, and we'll get the first time to hear from him on Wednesday. It feels known, right?
Yeah.
Like in terms of how he landed at Oklahoma, joining Ben Arbuckle. But I do think that everything that comes with, John Mateer and since taking over or coming into Norman and starting school in January, it's going to be kind of interesting to see, his comfort level. We talked about this about Dylan Gabriel all the time and how much it took like an adjustment year. You don't get that adjustment year now with John Mateer.
No, and I think that's what's fascinating. Like you said, everybody kind of knows the story, and he's done several interviews. I think you've interviewed him on the radio. Like he's done some stuff for One Oklahoma where he's been out and talked about some of his journey. For me, it's about what have the last couple months been like? How have you adjusted to being the quarterback at the University of Oklahoma? Like you said, it's not easy. Not everyone is Baker Mayfield and walks in and owns it and is that confident. And, somebody like Mateer, who comes from a place where he was the guy and had a great year a year ago, it's different coming to OU. What's that like? What's that been like trying to step into a position where they need leadership, right? They need some direction on offense. They need some of these younger guys have somebody to follow. And so what's that adjustment been like the last couple months? And then I think it's also just that relationship with Ben Arbuckle, and I know it's been talked about a lot. We've talked about it a lot, but how much does that help him? Especially, I remember when Ben came in here in the office and talked about, having John in there. It's like having another coach when they install their offense. Well, now they're about to install it for the first time in the spring. I'm sure they did some stuff in some meetings, with the offense and all of that through winter workouts. But now you're going to be out in the field and actually installing it. How's that partnership, that relationship going to help? Because, last year we talked a lot about Jackson Arnold and Seth Luttrell and how, them working together and, kind of taking this thing over. This is different. These two have done it, right? They did it last year at Washington State together. Jackson Arnold and Seth Luttrell hadn't done it. And so I think it was a really tough period. And we heard last year during the spring, the offense was abysmal during the spring, and we just kind of shrugged it off, right? We kind of were like, oh, well,
they'll figure it out.
They'll figure it out. It's growing pains, a whole bunch of new offensive linemen. You don't want to hear that this spring, right? You've got two guys that had a lot of success last year, and I'm not saying there won't be some bumps. I'm sure that there's going to be some tough practices, some days the offense is not clicking, but you want to hear by the end of spring, like, yeah, John Mateer, Ben Arbuckle on the same page, and guys are picking it up.
I know there's some people out there that are about to go on spring break, and yeah, there will be some bumps, I'm sure, in Destin. What in terms of, does it help, though, that they have done this together?
100%.
I mean, I think that, because they're bringing everything in from Pullman, there is a little bit of an understanding, like you've talked about, that maybe you just need to add a couple more pieces to the puzzle.
Well, and I think it's the big thing too, Eddie, is when they sit in the film room or they're out at practice, they can point to last year and say, hey, this is how we did it. Like, look how we did it. And not to say they're going to, exactly replicate what Washington State did. I mean, I think Ben Arbuckle, and he said it to us, he's going to adjust to the personnel he has. And I think that that's what's so pivotal about this spring is he's going to see what he's got. And, he hasn't had that yet in winter workouts. I think he had a little bit of it in bowl practices to kind of see what this team's made of, but you bring in a bunch of transfers. Like, now you're going to get to see it in spring. But I think the biggest thing is they know that they can do it at a high level because they did it a year ago. And I know it's a different place, not as tough of a schedule, but I do think that that's going to help them say, hey, we've done it before. This is what it's looked like, and this is what we want it to look like here at OU. So I do think it's a huge, huge boost, and I think it also gives the guys at OU some confidence, knowing that, hey, these guys were super successful a year ago. I mean, it was one of the best offenses in college football. John Mateer was arguably one of the best quarterbacks in college football a year ago. So OU can't say that
Right.
You know, they were arguably the worst in college football. So I think all of that plays into it, and that confidence will be key this spring in terms of installing that offense.
I'm kind of excited to talk to some of the freshmen as well. Obviously, it was a class that was much needed, especially on the offensive line. We'll be able to talk to Michael Fasusi, Ryan Foje, some of those guys that have come in and maybe are going to be able to add immediate depth on the offensive line. And then, I think that the linebacker position, talking about losing Zach Alley, it seems like it's kind of thin at some points, but you do like Kip Lewis. You do like Kobe McKenzie. We'll see what Samuel Omasigo is able to do. It's going to be kind of interesting to see how this whole thing comes together, because I think at the end of the day, in the back of everybody's minds is going to be August, and then obviously a 2025 football season that seems crucial to the current era of what this is.
There's just a lot of unknown,
Yeah.
right? Like, and that's exciting and also nerve-wracking, I think, for Oklahoma, because on offense, I mean, almost every position feels almost new. You got a lot of guys returning back on the offensive line, but I think all those guys are fighting for their jobs, and you like the depth you have there, but who's going to emerge? Can an Eddie Pierre-Louis win a starting battle? Can Jacob Sexton return from injury? Like, what's his status? I'm interested to hear who's in and out for practice. On defense, who's going to be the defensive leaders? And I know we'll get into some of this in tomorrow's show in the spring preview with Josh McCuistion, but there's just a lot of unknowns, new faces. Like you said, Michael Fasusi will probably be the star of the freshmen. I really want to hear from Elijah Thomas, who sounds like he's having just a hell of a winter, and I think could end up being a playmaker for OU. Emmanuel Choice, I think, is another one that could come in and maybe play a little bit for Oklahoma. So it's going to be fun. It's going to be a lot. You said, was it 35 newcomers plus Brent and Jim Nagy? We're talking to 37 people on Wednesday.
You're going to want to stay here on the SoonerScoop.com YouTube channel. It was a great time to, if you're not subscribed, hit the subscribe button. Join us for what is going to be a fascinating spring. Tell a friend. Let everybody know this is where we're going to be. We're basically going to live in the studio here and maybe even move over to the new studio.
And
here.
all the interviews will be on
SoonerScoop.com editorial page, right?
Okay.
And it's going to be fun. I'm excited about it, genuinely excited about it, because I think there is a little bit of unknown, which causes, a little bit of angst, because what's to come in the season. And it feels like they dug themselves a huge hole, being the laughingstock basically of the Southeastern Conference a year ago, and maybe even college football in general.
Yeah, I mean, look, they've got a lot to prove, and spring's not gonna make or break you. We're not gonna find out at the end of spring like, oh, this team's legit or not. That comes in September and October, November. But I do think maybe we'll get some more clarity on what this thing's going to look like. And look, spring is full of hopium, right? Yeah. And you just hope you walk out of spring healthy and you feel good about your team, and maybe that gives you some positive momentum heading into the portal, as well as just a huge summer.
Much like the aforementioned kids that will be looking for dealers, we'll be your dealer of hopium here on the SoonerScoop.com YouTube channel. That's going to be it for today. Just kind of wanted to set the foundation for what is going to be a big week in Norman. Good win for the OU basketball team. We recorded a hoops report that you can see.
Women's basketball.
The women's side, fantastic. Great. Headed to Greenville, number 5 overall seed.
Yep.
The other, you got 2 more, okay? And maybe 3 with the SEC tournament. Or they go on a run and win the national championship, which...
Not ruling it out.
That
Not on this program.
Maybe could rule it out. We'll see. For George, I'm Eddie. We'll see you back here on the SoonerScoop.com YouTube channel. On Tuesday, we'll be joined by Josh McCuistion, as George said, an entire spring preview, getting into really all the big headlines going into Wednesday and then obviously Thursday for the start of spring ball practice. Until then, we will see you next time.